What's going on, traders? We're going to make this quick, so let's get straight into it. So, right now, we're looking at the NQ. Today's been pretty boring. I mean, the majority of this week has been pretty much lackluster. There's really not much to talk about here besides potential upside and downside. And we really don't have any major news coming up this week. Now, what I will say is that I don't think a drop or a massive drop is coming, I should say. Until big tech earnings start kicking in, and we're starting to get a glimmer of what big tech earnings is going to look like. We got Tesla earnings coming in tomorrow, so it's going to be very interesting on how the market is going to react to big tech earnings. And I think it's really obvious that we're pretty much pumping into big tech earnings. If you've been following my YouTube channel for quite some time, you know that I am big on big tech earnings, and I think the market only cares about big tech earnings. No matter what bad news we get, whether it's CPI data, um, PCE, Jerome Powell, whatever the news is, despite any bad news we ever get within the market, if it's not big tech earnings, the market doesn't seem to care. Sure, we get little flashes of drops here and there, but it's nothing really special. And so I think when big tech earnings start to kick in and we start possibly getting bad earnings, or I wouldn't even say bad earnings, maybe not so surprising earnings, because let's be honest, I don't think Apple is going to beat earnings. And maybe they surprise, who knows? Maybe they pull something out of the hat or something. But regardless, I don't think a lot of these big tech earnings are really going to surprise. And I think that's what the market is anticipating. And this is why we're pretty much running to the upside. And if you're paying attention, we're pretty much just milking this this these rising wedges across the board. I mean, it's really obvious here. We're just milking this. I mean, we have more upside, potential upside here towards 20,900, and then it's really tough to see where we're going to go from there. But I imagine if this rising wedge is going to play out, then I imagine we're going to see something like this where we just start to reject from up here. And we can see this in various stocks and ETFs where we're seeing rising wedges across the board. And they're just pretty much milking it. I mean, buyers and sellers or market makers are just pretty much milking this move, and it's very frustrating and annoying, I imagine, for both sides because no one's really winning. I guess the Bulls are more so winning than the Bears, but overall, I mean, premiums are getting destroyed. It's a really annoying market. And in case you think I'm making up these patterns or anything like that, you rejected here. There's a wick right here. You rejected here and you somewhat rejected here, and there's potential for us to head back up here. Now, if the Nasdaq breaks back below 20,000 for 40, 430, somewhere around there, then I imagine we're going to head much lower towards 20,350 range. And then from there, it gets really ugly. But right now, things are just really, really annoying and just consolidating. One thing to be clear about if we are looking for downside is that we need to really clear these guys out. And I believe I talked about this before, where you want to look for areas where there's a lot of turbulence. And right now, I can't imagine it's just really tough for us to break through here without any massive news to come in. And so, if we are going to head further up, I imagine it's going to be more so of a liquidity grab for us to really charge up and just break through these guys and see what bad news we get. It's also important to note that at some point in time, I imagine, and this is very rare where the Nasdaq leaves gaps open like this. I mean, usually you see it from the Qs and the SPY. That's pretty normal. But when the Nasdaq and ES leaves gaps like this open, I mean, you see it right here. It's pretty rare. And so I imagine if we do get a drop, it's going to be massive, especially if we break below these guys and stop them out of their position. And so at some point in time, this gap is going to need to get filled on the NASDAQ. And what better pattern to do that in within besides a rising wedge, right? And so we fill this gap and then we start mitigating this fair value gap all the way to the downside. Now, to be clear, um, fair value gaps are based on color, or I have my fair value gaps based on color. So um, green fair value gaps will be bullish, right? So if we break above a fair value gap, that's signs of a breakout about to happen, or a potential breakout, I should say. And so at some point in time, I do imagine we're going to want to fill this gap. And right now, we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. I think it is very much possible that we head higher, but it's very tough to say what we're trying to do here. Maybe we get a quick dip. I mean, it's and what I mean by the rock and a hard place is that right here. more turbulence. I mean, it's turbulence on both sides, more so on this side than the other side, but regardless, it's just really, really annoying. I mean, we can look at the ES, and the ES is not giving much here. I mean, there's not much to talk about besides where we are on the ES. This pretty much is where the monthly level is, this yellow line right here, and we rejected it twice so far. And it is very much possible that we see maybe one more big candle to the upside here, and this is what I mean by, is this the last pump? Because we're seeing these rising wedges across the board, and then we're seeing these monthly levels pretty much, we're pretty close to these monthly levels. And so we see here that bears are getting very, very weak here, right? We're seeing that. And so it's very much possible that we see one of these moves where we pretty much have this huge bullish candle form to the upside, maybe hit about 5,930, somewhere around there before we possibly reject back down to the downside. And so again, we're seeing bears really weaken down here on the daily time frame. And so we go to the 4 hour time frame, and again, it's just very, very lackluster. There's nothing to really talk about here. We've been consolidating for so long, and this is the 4 hour too. So I mean, this is it's extremely annoying. Just pretty much trading this market. It's not really favorable for anybody unless you're really like day trading or anything like that. And so, I mean, we go down here and we see, just like I showed you guys on the NQ, we see this gap all the way down here. At some point in time, I imagine we're going to want to fill that gap. And I think big tech earnings is going to be the perfect opportunity to do so. I can't imagine. I mean, I guess election would cause something like this as well, but I imagine that the market is more so anything else outside of big tech earnings and earnings in general. I just think is a illusion, and it's just pretty much to cloud your judgment and things like that. I've always been a big believer that big tech earnings are the things that the market, the main number one thing that the market cares about. Why? Because these companies pretty much run the country, right? Apple, Microsoft, these are the companies, Amazon, these are the companies that keep the country moving, right? And so that's why I think it's more important than anything for these companies to continue to show progression. When they don't show progression, then that is a problem. And so again, we have this huge gap down here that eventually needs to be filled at around the 5,600 range, right? And I imagine that this fair value gap is going to get mitigated at the same time. And so it is, again, it's very rare where you see the ES and NQ leave these gaps open. And so we talk about the triple Qs. And it's essentially the same thing. There's just really not much to talk about here. I mean, we're looking at another rising wedge pattern. You see here, we rejected here, we rejected here, we bounced here, we bounced here. And now we're just sitting in the middle of Narnia, just really not doing anything. And you guys know that my all-time high target for the year, I want to make that clear, for the year is 510. And so it's very much possible that we can see that happen very soon. And I think once that happens, 510, 505 being the minimum, I think that's when the massive drop is going to come in. Now, one or two things can happen here, and it's leaning more so bullish than bearish. Where we see this move happen, where we pretty much hit 485, we retest 485. I believe I mentioned this in another video where at some point in time, we will want to retest 485. It just seems like the market is really milking this to the point that it's really tough to see happen. And so we pretty much hit 485 and then see maybe this move happen and then do one of these, or we do one of these, we just head straight up there and then we start to head lower. I mean, we're seeing it here. We have a higher low, and so I mean, either from here we create another higher low and a higher high, and then we start to break down from there. It's important to note that this is monthly resistance as well. I mean, you see it right here. I mean, this isn't a monthly chart, but this yellow line is monthly resistance. So pretty much where we closed at last month. And so if we're looking at the same scenario here, or this potential scenario of upside, I imagine this is pretty much where we're going to stop. And if we do break a little bit higher, I imagine that that's when we're going to get our 510 target. Because if we extend this, then we're looking at this move here. So somewhere between 510, 515, if we're considering going that high. And then from there it just gets crazy. I mean, we break and retest and do one of these moves. Now, I'm not counting on that happening. I mean, I'm not counting on the 515 target happening. It's just no signs of that right now, so I'm still focused on the 510 target. If we get to that 510 target, then we can, pretty much adapt and adjust from there. And if we do look at a drop, then I would imagine that we're just going to hit about 485, and then we'll have to see what happens from there. And again, I mean, we still have these gaps that just need to be closed to the downside at some point in time. It's just bulls are just really not giving up. And so I think this just pretty much proves that the market is waiting on big tech earnings. Simple as that. We get Apple with Nvidia, all that fun stuff, and I think the moment these guys have really bad earnings, which I think Apple is probably going to have bad earnings. I mean, it's been showing signs that that's going to be the case. Then I imagine that's when it's going to happen. And so we look at the SPY. And so I've seen this happen so many times, and I didn't mark it here, but I've seen this in so many cases where the spy, and this isn't going to be perfect, this might be a little bit off, but I've seen this move happen so often, right? Where you break out of these rising wedges, right, to the upside. And mind you, rising wedges are bearish patterns, right? And so I've seen this happen so often where you break above these patterns and then you start to roll over. Why? Because they're originally bearish patterns. And so I do imagine at some point in time, and I can't say for sure if this is going to be the case here. I mean, you see it right here. Um, at some point in time, we're going to see that rolling over process come into effect. Whether earnings causes that is really tough to say. But I mean, you see it right here. I mean, look where we are. It's a very weird spot right here. And I'm not going to say if we're going to like break down from here because the Qs look bullish, the NQ looks bullish. So it's really tough for me to say that the SPY is just going to immediately reject from here. Okay, maybe it just consolidates from here. Who knows? It's really tough to say considering how annoying and boring the market is, and it's just really not giving up much. I mean, we can go to the 4 hour time frame, maybe we could find something there, but again, the reason why I say it's tough to say is because look what's happening. I mean, we just keep doing this move. We just keep going back and forth. So either we're just gonna break down completely and start, clearing out this area down here, or we're just gonna do this all over again and break higher, and then it's really annoying, right? And so, I mean, we can look at Nvidia. And so we look at Nvidia, and then I have to cut this video short. I'm sorry I'm kind of like rambling. It's simply because I have like a massive headache, and I just want to knock this video out for you guys. But we look at Nvidia, and we have a rising wedge pattern, right? And so if we pretty much look at where the top of this rising wedge pattern is, we're looking at a move to about 145, highest possibly is 150. And so again, bears are getting weak here. And this is why I'm pretty much saying, is this the final pump? If we do get a pump to the upside, is this the last and final push? And will it happen in a massive way? Again, it's very limited upside if we're, going by these rising wedges. Okay, so very limited upside. And then again, we still have a lot of gaps to the downside. And so my overall point is that if we do pump to the upside, maybe tomorrow, we don't have major news for us to really go crazy. But if we do, I think that it's going to be the final one heading into big tech earnings. That's my personal opinion. Maybe I'm wrong here, but if we pump, okay, keyword is if we pump, keywords. If we pump and we start seeing us hit the top of these rising wedges, pay attention to what earnings is coming up once we hit the top of these wedges. Okay. Um, if we hit the top of these wedges, and maybe we already hit the top here, and then we're probably going to break down from here. Who knows? But if we get one final push to the upside and we hit the top of these wedges, pay attention to what earnings is coming up if we do just so happen to do that. All right. And that's really all I have for this video. Again, sorry. I want to go over a lot more. Massive headache right now. And so we'll get deeper into things heading into tomorrow or tomorrow close because we do have Tesla earnings, I believe tomorrow as well. So it's gonna be a very interesting rest of the week. I'm hoping hopefully we get more action. Um And that's pretty much all I have. So until the next video, traders, have a good one.